Okay. Welcome back to the Solutions Manual podcast. I am Dr. Sarah Farwell,
And I'm Dr. Matt Zatonsky.
and we are so excited to have a very special guest with us today, Phil Rathosky. Thank you so much for joining the Solutions Manual podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here.
So one of the things we're talking about as part of a series recently on our Solutions Manual podcast are not just what it takes to transform your mind or your body and weight management, but what it takes for it to stick. And you, Phil, are one of these people that has made a remarkable transformation in many ways over the last few years. And you're still on a long, lifelong journey, but you have learned things that work for you and strategies and things maybe you can share about what it takes to actually make that stick. So we are really, really looking forward to hearing your story today and sharing it with our pod squad. So tell us about you, Phil. Where did you start? Tell us your story and where did you start mentally, physically, and open it up for us.
Yeah, a little bit of a mess, just about every aspect of the word. I think all of us can relate to that in some way or other. So this whole process started for me about 5 years ago, right actually as the COVID pandemic was kind of unfolding around us. I was maybe right before the kind of March 2020 global shutdown. I was at a work event. I worked for a pharmaceutical company at the time. Was sitting in a giant auditorium on our campus. Our CEO was just about to walk on stage to give kind of a town hall presentation to all of us. I was in the third row, right in dead center with one of my colleagues, and the chair that I was sitting in broke in front of the entire auditorium of colleagues and peers and leaders. At that point, I weighed about 594 pounds at 6'2", so I had a pretty high BMI. I think people always say that I carried it well. When I throw that number out there, people are in disbelief, but it was a very unfortunately very real and very documented number in my medical records. And so, that was kind of I feel like everybody at that point has to have sort of a rock bottom moment that kind of forces you to change or to make a difference or to pivot. People have been telling me for years that I need to get my weight under control. I need to get my health under control. I'm just like, yeah, it's fine, whatever. So I feel like everybody has to kind of hit that point. And for me, that was that point. I left that meeting, kind of waddled my way out of the auditorium and then stood in the lobby and made a call to my doctor right at that minute. I said, I need to get in the next 2 weeks to figure this out. So that's sort of where the process started for me. That was again probably January of 2020. So I started meeting with a team from the University of Pennsylvania medical system here in Philadelphia, and so I started going through some weight loss classes and appointments, and we kind of decided with my medical team that, kind of given my weight and my health situation at that time, that there was a surgical intervention that was needed to at least kind of kickstart me on the right path. And just given my size and kind of the potential for adverse impacts, we decided on a sleeve gastrectomy, a vertical sleeve gastrectomy. It was a little bit less invasive, less potential for issues at that size. And the original plan was for me to go through with that procedure, drop enough weight that I was then able to safely go through the full gastric bypass to kind of get me to my target weight. That happened again kind of right as COVID was happening, which was challenging. I had the sleeve surgery in January of 2021. My surgery weight, I think, was 561 pounds. I lost about 30 pounds in the 9 months or so that I started the process. And so I had the sleeve, was kind of going through that process, decided to take a step and join a gym and working with a personal trainer. That was a big step for me. That was something that I had always thought would be, really cool, but at my size was never able to really do much of anything. And so I remember pacing outside of the gym for probably about 15 or 20 minutes before I had my appointment set with the trainer, just because I was super nervous. I had gone to two other gyms at that point. I was around 470 pounds at that point, and two other gyms had told me that they had never worked with somebody of my size before. They weren't sure what to do or how to program, and so I was like, am I a lost cause? Like, what's going on here?
Wow.
And so this was kind of the last hope for me. And I remember that trainer, his name was Chris. We're still good friends to this day. And he told me, he's like, let me work with you for 2 weeks. If you don't see a difference, if you don't notice a difference, if you hate it and you don't want to do it anymore, like I'm not going to charge you anything. I want you to see that,
Mhm.
I'm invested. I want to help you. I want to figure this out. And that was sort of my hook for kind of getting myself in the door and sticking with a program like that.
Yeah.
Really, that was kind of the catalyst for all of this, and then the rest is, as they say, history. I'm currently sitting at about 245 pounds. It's right around my goal weight. Kind of stopped measuring things in terms of body weight and looking at body composition as sort of my metric for success, being a fairly large framed and tall person. A lot of doctors have set my goal weight around 170 pounds. That's a little, um, I look a little strange, I think, that way. So my goal is to sit around, 12 to 15% body fat in the end. I'm currently at 17%. So that's sort of where we're sitting and where we're hopefully headed in the future.
Wow,
Yeah.
there, Phil, there's so many things. And again, I'm a surgeon by training myself. Yeah, so you had a sleeve gastrectomy as the first intervention, which again, 595 pounds. For our European listeners, that's approximately 270 kilograms, I believe, as a starting weight. So this is a rather radical intervention. Typically, typically we know from the available evidence that it does yield results relatively fast because it reduces your ability to eat. I mean, there's a less amount that you can eat in any given time, which by default creates an energy deficit. That's what typically happens. It also has that surgery also has a tendency to reduce the levels of ghrelin, which is one of the appetite hormones. So it should, in theory, make you less hungry, right? There are some, let's say, metabolic benefits coming from the surgery itself.
I was pretty much considered to be on track. So when I had the surgery, I was at 561 pounds in January, and then around early April or so, I was right around 450. So it was just about a little over 100 pounds in
Okay, 100 pounds. Okay.
three months or so. So he was expecting about 30 pounds a month for the first,
Mhm.
6 to 9 months.
Mhm. So this is a fairly rapid rate then, right? It's a relatively large result. But we also know from literature that a lot of people, even after the surgery, without implementing significant changes to their lifestyle, will eventually regain the weight that they have lost. And that happens through multiple mechanisms, which we can probably discuss later when we dive a little bit deeper into the science. But the truth is that for the vast majority of the people, even if they cannot eat as much as they could before, they will simply find denser sources of calories or either through drinks or other ways that can relatively easily restore them to where they started. Now, this didn't happen to you at all, right? You are 5 years into your journey. You continue to get better. I think you've mentioned now you are at now 220,
245.
245. So that's approximately 110 kilograms, which is remarkable. And again, 17% body fat, that's probably better than most already, right? This despite you being so that's a very remarkable journey. How can people repeat your success? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to gloss over this and say that it was completely linear, because it certainly wasn't. There was a time, probably about a year ago, that I had ended up closer back to about 300 pounds. So I had gone through 2 rounds of plastic surgery, for skin removal during the last two or so years of this process. And so I was at my absolute lowest weight. I was at 238 pounds before I had my first round of plastic surgery.
Mhm.
After that, it kind of gradually started to go back up just a little bit over the course of about a year or so. And then I was working with the same trainer for quite a while. We'd kind of fallen into a little bit of a routine. I think routine is great in a lot of aspects, but I think it can also kind of pull you into a trap of being comfortable and getting stuck um, in a zone of comfort, right? And he's fantastic. He was the one who kind of got me interested in all of this. But I thought, kind of at that point, it was time to shake things up and do things a little bit differently. So I realized, I was closing in around, 305 pounds again. And I'm like, I can't go back to that. And so I started working with another coach who set me on a very kind of specific nutritional and fitness plan that was very different, I think, from what I'm used to, and that kind of really
Hmm.
kind of pushed my success kind of to where it is at the moment. So I think being realistic about your expectations is really,
Hmm.
really important. I'm in a number of different kind of online support groups for specifically for men who have gone through bariatric surgery or looking at weight loss, because I think there's a lot of great resources out there for women, but I found very few resources for men, and the specific issues that we have kind of in this process. I think, as a population, we just tend to not talk about these things a whole lot because it's just not something that we are good at doing. And I think there's a lot of kind of misaligned expectations out there. You mentioned at the very beginning, that the weight loss was pretty rapid in the first 3 months, and it was. And I think one of the issues that I fell into, one of the traps that I had fallen into, was I had anticipated that that was going to be the case all the time. Even 5 years out, I'm like, why? I'm still trying to, work on my body composition a little bit, and I'm getting frustrated, and I have gotten frustrated at, losing 5 pounds a month. And, I have in the back of my mind, I'm like, I did this 2 years ago. I was able to lose, 60 pounds in 2 months. Why can't I do this again? And I think that people get stuck in that and they don't see the progress happening. So then they just give up. They're like, it's not working. The surgery is a failure. I messed up and it's done. So then they kind of get back on off track and end
Hmm.
up with the regain. And so I think that's the biggest piece that I try to keep in mind. And I try to remind other people when I see them kind of teetering on that brink. I'm like, "Just remember, it's not a linear process. It's not as easy as it was. It's not going to be as fast as it was. You have to be in it for the long haul."
Well,
Yeah.
for life. And you've touched about adaptation, right? Both in terms of your body adapting to how you eat and what you are, but also adapting to the training that you had, which I
Mhm.
think, well, again, Sarah is the expert here, but adaptation is a real thing. And being
Mhm.
able to constantly challenge yourself and change your routine is probably important, very important part of the process. And again, we'll probably go back into this later in the conversation. But one more question I had is again, this expectations management. We hear this quite a lot. To
Mhm.
me, it sounds that 5 pounds, so a pound per week, more than pound per week, that's still remarkable, right?
Mhm.
Mhm.
And yes, and there are a lot of people I would say out there who would love to be able to lose weight at that rate, but to you is frustrating simply because of the
Exactly.
previous values that you were seeing on the scale. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I know I talk to my friends who, haven't had the interventions that I've had, and they're just like, "Well, that's 5 pounds a month. That's great. I would love to be able to do that." And it's just having gone through that and having experienced something at the complete opposite end of the spectrum and having things happen so quickly and having kind of that expectation set that this is how things work now. I can
Mhm.
not have to put a whole ton of effort into it. I can lose weight pretty quickly. I don't have to really pay a whole lot of attention to what I'm doing or what I'm eating. Sure, that's going to work for the first 9 months or so, but if you keep doing it that way, like you said, your body's going to adapt to it. And if you don't make those sort of those lifelong habit changes and kind of rethink how you think about food and your relationship with food and your relationship with exercise and movement, it's gonna, at some point it's gonna stop and you're gonna sort of hit a wall and it's gonna come, kind of compounding back on fairly quickly.
Mhm. Yeah. And we know we have some reasons scientifically why. The challenge for us is when the brain and the body are in conflict with each other. And you just said it, like, why can't I lose that? Or why can't I do the same thing that I did before? I used to do this. I used to be able to do this.
Hmm.
But, I also used to, you wore different shoe size, you wear a different clothing size. Like, why would you have to kind of keep up in the same way?
Yeah.
And so physiologically we're resetting over and over and over, not just from a calorie in and out perspective, but everything has to shift as you go. So we have to teach the brain that you're not starting in the same place. And I think it sounds like this change that you've made where you and Chris have an amazing relationship and he got you through a really critical point in your journey. And it doesn't mean that you wouldn't necessarily go back to him or do something different with him in the future, but you what I'm hearing you say is you decided, you know what, we need to change this up so that I don't put on more weight, or so that I can reframe my mindset to be able to maintain this. And sometimes that comes from a savvy trainer or a nutritionist or a doctor, but it sounds like it came from you too. So you've already made those mindset changes to recognize when a difference is needed so that you can keep up with that. And it has nothing to do with where you were. It's just now you're reassessing what you need now. So good for you on
Yeah.
that.
And that
And
was
I
one of the
want
things that was one of the things that was super helpful for me as I went through the process. So part of having a surgery, one of my, insurance company requirements to go through that process was to have a number of like psychotherapy appointments. And I know when I first had that, I kind of rolled my eyes. I'm like, oh, this is annoying, and I have to like just jump over all these extra hurdles and hoops and things. And I see this all the time in all these online support groups about they're like, what do I have to say? How do I have to answer the questions to pass? I'm like, it's not about passing. I guess it is at some point if you want to move forward, but it's really about if you can't go through any of this without tweaking the way that you're thinking about any of this. If you just focus on the physiological pieces of it and the physical part of it, again, you're gonna hit at some point a wall or a barrier, and you're not gonna be able to train your brain to think differently about that. And so I was really lucky that I was kind of forced into that requirement to have that at least for the first year, as part of the program, was to force myself to think about these things differently and to reframe, like you mentioned, kind of how uh, you know how the process has changed, how I've changed, how I need to change the way that I think about things, and kind of reset and realign my expectations. Otherwise, it's not going to be a long-term success.
Yeah, and if you're thinking about the what do I have to say? What do I have to do to basically pass the test, but not learn the information? Then your mindset isn't in the right place anyway. So hopefully people are understanding that to be a candidate for long-term weight management, you kind of have to come from that angle first. So can I back up just one thing? You mentioned in your story that people around you had said to you in your life, you should be doing this, or you should do this, or you should do this. And you kind of, yeah, I know. Did you ever try anything on your own? I mean, how was that for you?
Well,
Did
yeah,
you try anything on your own that actually, like, did you diet? Did you do any workout? I mean, Penn State, we walked everywhere, so there's
yeah,
that. Like,
yeah.
so
That that was when I kind of really noticed the weight coming on, was when I left Penn State and was in grad school and was, kind of working a full-time job and also taking night classes full time and having to commute and not having a whole lot of time to do anything. At Penn State, we had all the space in the world and all the time in the world. We had to walk everywhere, so it was great. But that's really kind of when everything piled on really quickly. I think that, you know, I tried a lot of those different kind of interventions, right? I tried working with a trainer at one point. I was so heavy and so out of shape that I wasn't able to do a whole lot, and that was really frustrating, really, really fast.
okay.
I wasn't able to, walk on a treadmill for more than 5 minutes, and I was so out of breath that I had to stop. And I'm like, I just got so disgusted with all of it that it made me frustrated. I was eating so much food just to feel satiated and full, and when I would try to diet or I would try to cut down the amount that I was eating, I I felt like I was like starving myself. I'm just like, oh my God, like I feel awful. My energy's low. I can't do anything. And so then again, I just got, really frustrated really quickly. And so that's kind of why I thought about the surgery. And people had mentioned that to me too. They're like, have you thought about weight loss surgery? I'm just like, I don't really like the doctor. I don't like hospitals. I don't do all that stuff. And I finally got to the point where I was just like, I've tried these other things. I feel like at the weight that I am, at the health kind of crisis tipping point that I'm at, I need to try something a little bit drastic, because clearly
Mhm.
these other things haven't worked for me. And so,
Mhm.
it was time to kind of think about something else.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. Well, so this means even after the surgical interventions that you've had, and you still have some to go, right? For yourself, it still puts you in the 5% of people that manage to keep weight off, regardless of the intervention, regardless of whether it's diet, or some combination of surgery and diet and other lifestyle changes, medications, anything. Because we know that 95% of people, after attempting a change in their weight, often weight loss, will regain at least what they had to at least what they were, if not more. So that is so staggering
Scary.
of a number that, yeah, it is. And there are, of course, we can get into the mindset too a little bit more because we've alluded to that. But metabolically speaking, the reasons for that, and we started to go this direction too, is you start with at a certain weight, you need a certain amount of calories and you need energy to maintain your body at that point. But then there's a cycle because if you're not in some deficit based on what you need for your daily needs, in addition to what you're putting into your body, and then what goes out, you will continue to stay at that heavier weight or put on more weight if it's not adjusted. And then when you start to lose weight, you need to reevaluate what your energy needs are, what to put in, what to put out. So we know that, and this is part of these adaptations that occur. So scientifically speaking, we start by evaluating your basal metabolic rate, which is just the calories you need, the energy you need to do your basic stuff. That's breathing, general living, all the physiological pieces of that. And that takes into account your age, your biological sex, and then we use that to calculate your total daily energy expenditure, right? Which then factors in your activity level, your generally activity level. And this is just the general number of calories that you need based on all of these factors that are somewhat standardized now. It's a little bit different for men and women. There's many different calculations that you can do and equations where they kind of give you the same thing. So something similar. And that gives you a number of calories that you need a day to function. So if you are setting a goal for yourself to lose a certain amount of weight, then you plug in your target, a reasonable target over a reasonable amount of time so that you can calculate the difference between what you need every day and what you would need at that target weight or at that target goal, right? And then you find out what the difference is between that. That's your calorie deficit. And then you build that into not only what you eat or what you don't eat, but your movement as well, right? So did you have coaches at that time kind of talk to you about this? Or how was around your surgeries and early on, was this part of your education, and is it now? And what was your experience in just simply talking about BMR start before and after?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I'm super glad you brought that up because that was not something that was in my process, at least at the onset. And, I think a lot of having a nutritionist and going through the nutritional process was definitely part of my process at the very beginning, right? They're evaluating what I'm eating, the types of food that I'm eating, when I'm eating, how much I'm eating, giving me some general recommendations around, uh, protein goals and calorie goals that I should be hitting at, different markers after my surgery date. But I think a lot of those folks are very focused on people who are generally sedentary and not super active and not doing a whole ton of extra movement. So, my surgery team had set sort of a lifetime goal of 1,200 calories a day for me for the rest of my life. And as someone now who
Very low.
is,
That's
yeah,
very low.
Very low.
it is very low. And I was sitting at that for a while, and I remember I kind of got to a plateau and was like, why? I'm in the gym all the time. I'm on the treadmill. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. I'm eating what I need to be eating. Why isn't the scale moving? And, a couple different people had mentioned, they're like, that seems really low for somebody who's, pretty active and is out there doing stuff. And so I actually went and I had a VO2 max test done. I had my TDEE calculated based on, riding a bike inside at a weird pace for a long time and breathing into that awful little mask.
Yeah, so VO2 max, just for our listeners, we're referring to the maximum amount of oxygen that you can process during physical exercise. So it's a measure of your physical performance. right?
Mhm.
And TDEE is just a shortcut for total daily energy expenditure. It's essentially how much energy are you using every day. And it's a combination of your basic metabolic rate, so keeping you alive, and then your activity levels, correct?
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that was a piece that I hadn't gotten at the very beginning of the process. And I think that if I had somebody who was a little bit more kind of athletically focused with that peace of mind, I found myself kind of falling into this crevice of we have the nutritionists on one side who are focusing mostly on sedentary bariatric patients, and then we have the athletic coaches and the athletic nutritionists who are focusing on people who've never had a bariatric surgery, of a normal size stomach, and are telling me to eat 5,000 calories a day. I'm just like, I physically can't take
Okay.
in that much food because my stomach is the size of a banana. I can't eat that much all day long. And so for me, like, it was really hard to kind of figure out where in the world do I fit in? Like, I just kind of ended up cutting the middle ground a little bit. It's not 1,200 calories. It's not 5,000 calories. So I'm sitting like around 2,200 calories a day. And kind of my goal weight in grams of protein. And so how I've been, how I've been operating, and it's been pretty successful so far. But I really wish I would have had more of that kind of education
Mhm.
at the beginning, and especially for my medical team. My medical team really didn't have a whole ton of kind of the athletic piece in mind, which was a little bit frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And especially to set the goal at the beginning, just sort of sounds like a little bit arbitrarily, is really dangerous too, for not just your body, but your mind as well. I mean, talk about why people feel like they're in a failure. Well, you're setting yourself up for failure right away. So,
Yes, it's unachievable, unsustainable
yeah,
goal
yeah.
from the
Unsustainable, I
very
think, is the key
outset.
word.
Yeah.
I've had many people that have mentioned that, my nutritionist said that I can't ever have bread, I can't ever have pizza, I can't ever have this or this or this. And I'm like, if you surround yourself with this incredibly restrictive mindset, it's going to be really, really, really tough to make any sort of progress forward, because that's just a really negative place to be stuck in.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and Phil, so I think that's a perfect time to tell and explain to everyone. I'm sure you have pizza or enjoy pizza regularly, despite your
It's my
success,
favorite food
right?
in the
It
entire
is
world.
absolutely fine to enjoy foods that you eat. And Sarah and I, we cover different areas. We have different areas of expertise in how we approach. And I'm very much into the more cognitive and mental aspects as well. So this, you use
I'm
the
more into pizza.
relationship with food, right? Relationship with food. It's an interesting topic, and again, I think everyone should hear from you. It's okay to enjoy the foods that you love, and it's unreasonable to expect yourself to be able to say no to the things you like, love, or that will for the rest of your life,
Hmm.
because it's not sustainable,
Hmm.
and it's impossible to be successful when you believe that the road to success leads through ridiculous restrictions.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like I said, my coach has given me a pretty prescriptive nutrition plan, which I appreciate, as someone who is sort of a give it to me and let me execute it, as opposed to here give me these nebulous macros, calorie guidelines, and let me try to figure it out on my own. He was very prescriptive about what I should be eating and when and how much. But he does give me, an off-plan meal every week, and so I find myself looking forward to that at some points, where I can, this is my chance to have one or two pieces, not two entire pizzas like I used to, 5 years ago, but I'm able to have a piece or two of pizza, or to make it in a different way. I've used the low carb tortillas in an air fryer with some, low sugar marinara sauce and some part skim mozzarella cheese on it. It tastes exactly the same. It's just kind of prepared in a different and thoughtful way. But being able to allow yourself to have some of those at some point is super helpful. I've had, again, another group of people in my life that they're like, well, I eat really clean Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then I just kind of let myself have whatever I want on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I'm like, well, that's still almost 50% of the week that you're not really thinking about it. And so I think there's some sort of middle ground. And for me, giving myself that one meal, it usually ends up being like a Saturday afternoon or like a Sunday afternoon, where I can kind of, you know, not necessarily follow the super restrictive and prescriptive plans that I have, be a little bit more kind of enjoying the things that I like to have. And again, I look forward to that all week. When I think about it, I'm like, oh, chicken and rice and all this nonsense all week long. And I'm like, but remember Saturday you have this plan and you can look forward to this piece. And so it's really, really helpful. And it's nice to have something to look forward to, I think.
Yeah.
Not only
Yeah.
helpful, but cycling energy, or actually eating more on sometimes during the week, it actually helps to maintain and lose weight as well. Sarah, before we continue, because we touched about many different things in the last few minutes, we already touched on adaptation, which is your body will try to do everything to adapt to the new change you've made and then stop it from happening. And when you set yourself a goal and you stick to it, it is inevitable that with every pound that you lose, your TDEE and basic metabolic rate start to climb down, which means that with every pound lost, even if you're on a fixed, ridiculous 1,200 calories plan, every subsequent pound becomes more difficult to lose or takes longer time to lose. I think this is something that a lot of people forget about. Not knowing this at the beginning can create wrong expectations. So this adaptation part and then constant changes to your program are essential. But there are two other mechanisms that the bodies typically do when we are losing weight, right? There's this, the adaptation is one, then there's restoration, and then there's prevention. We're coming to the end of the year. And what will happen is in January, a lot of people will tell to themselves, I'm going on this strict regimen, this diet, this program. And unfortunately, most of them will fail. And we move into the consequences of having that mindset or trying to do things that way in a minute. But what happens is, as you're adopting, because you're eating less energy than you have been eating before, what your body will try to do, we call this the restoration phase, it will increase the rate of weight regain once energy surplus becomes available. And that happens through hormonal regulation, through a hormone called leptin, which makes you overly hungry. And this process is a defensive mechanism that your body has that tells your brain, okay, there's been not enough food for quite a while. I have been losing my weight, which is typically a combination of a loss of fat, but also lean muscle mass. And that's important. And we'll talk about muscle mass in a minute as well. And your brain will tell your body, we need to do something next time the food is available to get back to where we started. Because if this continues, things are going to get bad. Mm-hmm. And the third mechanism is prevention. And prevention is once your energy deficit, and the more rapid the bigger the energy deficit is, the more likely your organism is and your body is to try to prevent it happening again in the future. So as we are losing mass or weight or fat, we don't lose the fat cells, the adipocytes. They only shrink, but they're still there. Mm-hmm. But the next time we get energy surplus, they will increase in size, but if the weight loss was rapid, the body will also produce new adipocytes, new fat cells, so it can store more fat than it did before dieting to get ready or prevent this rapid loss or access to food the next time that happens. Which means that every time you regain a large amount of weight, especially after a large weight loss, you will have more fat cells to store more energy, making your every subsequent attempt to lose weight increasingly more difficult. And if we add to this the fact that we gain weight by storing fat, but we lose weight by shrinking fat cells and losing muscle mass, that becomes even more problematic because our basic metabolic rate primarily depends on lean muscle mass. Mm-hmm. So it's very easy to end up with the same body weight as before the diet, with less muscle, and having to eat less now just to keep the previous weight. Mm-hmm. And that's, for many people, that's a disaster. Now, you managed to avoid or learn to avoid most of those pitfalls. And it seems to me from what you're saying that most of that work does not necessarily happen only in the gym. There's a lot of things that are happening here in your head. And I would love to hear more about this.
Yeah, I think kind of at the onset, my only goal when I started all this was to drop weight by any means necessary, whether that's losing fat cells, whether it's losing muscle, I only cared about the number that I saw on the scale. And I that was true for probably the first, I don't know, 18 months or so. So I started at 594, was 561 in January when I started the surgery. I was down to under 300 by this time the first year. So within a year, I was under 300 pounds. I was super ecstatic about that. I was so excited. I'm like, this is great. I was training in the gym, 3 days a week with my coach. But again, I wasn't really paying attention to any of that. I just wanted that number to be as low as it possibly could be. And I think that was sort of a mindset trap that I fell into pretty quickly. It's just being focused on body weight as the only true measure of success. Because, like you mentioned, I think that if that's the only mechanism that you're using, you're gonna get to that point where you're losing so much muscle mass and your BMR is going down so low that it's you're gonna get to a point where it kind of stops or it levels out or plateaus, and you're gonna get frustrated. You're gonna fall into that kind of that mindset shift. So I was talking to my prior coach, my current coach are very, very much on board with this, which was really helpful for me to understand is that, body weight isn't always the best or the most helpful kind of predictor of or measure of success especially in this kind of long-term game. And so I've been doing like a DEXA in-body scan a couple times a year just so I can get a little bit more of a holistic picture of what my body composition looks like. And so, like I mentioned kind of at the onset, my goal is I have a target body fat percentage that I'm looking at. And so to me, it really
Fantastic.
doesn't matter a whole lot what that number on the scale says, as long as my body fat is below, a certain number or in a certain range. Um, that's that means success for me. And I think that it was really, really hard to get away from being on the scale. I think, as
Mhm.
somebody who was overweight for most of his life, I've had a very unhealthy relationship with the scale, and I think that I
Mhm.
still do. I don't think that's gone away at all. Um, but I think that it's really important to kind of shift your mind away from that being sort of the end all be all to whether or not you're a successful participant in a kind of weight loss intervention or a weight loss
And
strategy or program.
you're also use so one thing just want to clarify, you used the word DEXA. By DEXA, we understand a low radiation type of an X-ray scan that is the gold standard in assessments of your lean body mass and your fat mass. So it's the best way that we know of that allows us to estimate the percentage of body fat that you have. There are multiple devices that people have that try to guess what it is by measuring how much current can flow through your body. Those can vary quite dramatically. I think they have a margin of error like 3 to 5% even on some of those devices, which I think it makes them largely useless in tracking those changes. But another thing so I just want to clarify what DEXA is. It's not readily available. It requires you to go to a place where you can have those scans. It's not something you can do every day. But the other thing we've mentioned is it's not necessarily the number on the scale that matters for your long-term success and your long-term health. Scales can help if you know how to use and interpret that correctly, but it's by far not the best thing to measure on your journey, or at least not the only one, and shouldn't be looked at. So going back to that, so how did that mindset evolve, and most importantly, why? So what happened that you started changing your relationship with food and your relationship with the scale?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I had to change was just the way and the function that I see food having in my life, right? I feel like I used to think of food as a way to celebrate or a way to alleviate boredom or something fun to do. I liked it. I enjoyed eating food. It was a fun thing to do, and that was sort of how I viewed it. And I think that through this whole process, I've really learned a little bit more about kind of viewing food as fuel, right? I mean, that doesn't mean you can't enjoy it. That doesn't mean you can't use it as a celebration at some point. But I think the primary way that I see it now is as a way to fuel my body and keep me going and get me through my workouts and get me through my day and help me feel my best. And I think that
Mhm.
that took a little bit of a length of time, I think, to shift. I think once I started seeing the benefits of being thoughtful and proactive about the macros that I was intaking, my protein, my fat, my carb load, the type of food that I was eating. I think I was very, as many people in the developed world are today, very reliant on highly processed food and things that you can eat really, really quickly and are readily available. Um, but shifting away from that, gradually, I think, and then being a little bit more thoughtful about eating more kind of whole foods, I saw a really, really quick shift in the way that I was sleeping, in the energy levels that I had throughout the day, the energy that I had in the gym, my ability to lift heavier and run faster and things that I couldn't do before. And that really kind of encouraged me a little bit more. And I'm like, wow, this it's working. Like this is true. All these people have said this for so long that food is fuel and that's how you should see it. And I
Mhm.
was seeing that kind of play out in my everyday life. And so that was really encouraging to kind of keep my mindset shifted that way. And it's frustrating to see so many companies in the world, thinking about food as such a heavily processed item and adding all these, different things to it that kind of make people, chronically inflamed and just chronically unhealthy. And I think that, it's a major thing that I think we as a society have to think about, because having been on that side of it and having felt the way that I felt and being on so many medications and my doctor threatening to put me on a statin for the rest of my life because I had high cholesterol because of the food that I was eating, that was really like a wake up call. And since I made that shift away from kind of thinking of food as a way to alleviate boredom or something that I like to do and more of as a fuel, I think that just about every aspect of my life has changed for the positive because of that. And I think because of that and because of being able to experience the before and the after, I'm highly unlikely to go back to kind of the old way of operating.
Mhm.
And again, it's interesting how many people refer to factory produced edible substances as foods, right? Because again,
Yeah.
that's not really food, right? Ultra
Yep.
processed food, I think, is still a wrong noun to use. Phil or Sarah, what are the macros for our listeners that you are referring to? Why does it matter?
Okay, I'll let the science expert chime in first, and I'll maybe add kind of how I view and how I operate in that world.
Macronutrients. Yeah, we're talking about protein, building blocks. We're talking about carbohydrates. We do talk about healthy fats. Some people argue dietary fiber as part of your carbohydrates needs to be set specifically as well to help you. And so protein, carbohydrate, fat, and then within each of those categories, we can kind of subcategorize those appropriately.
So these are the macros,
These are
macronutrients.
these are the macronutrients.
So it
Yes,
implies that there is probably some micro ones, the smaller ones as well, right?
of course. The micro ones, vitamins, minerals, anything that is not macro. The other
But
thing,
still,
now
but still necessary, right? But
it's
still
still
needed. Yeah.
necessary. This is where supplementation comes into play. But to clarify, supplementation is not necessarily recommended or appropriate for everybody, and really depends on the person, the lifestyle, their diet, what their preferences are.
Mhm.
But the goals for macronutrients come from your BMR and come from your TDEE, as well as either the goal that you have for your maintenance, or a target composition, or a target weight as well. So my my macro targets are going to be very different from Phil's. It will be very different from Matt's,
Mhm.
and vice versa. And my macro targets for where I would want to be or maintain will change. The older I get, they can change. How I get these macros every day or every week really depend on wholesome foods, like you said, Phil. And if I'm not meeting those targets, then this is where we can add things like whey proteins or supplements. If you're looking for protein, you can supplement with dietary fiber. And this is also where education and food labels comes into play as well.
Mhm.
So macronutrients is also a if someone is just starting out and doesn't know really what to do with it, it's okay. Like I would recommend start with know what you put in your body, from a general standpoint. Read a label, understand where it came from, look at the ingredients. If you have questions about ingredients, ask. If there are, tons of ingredients on something and you don't recognize the names, maybe really reconsider what you're putting in your body. Then understand a numerical standpoint and a quantitative standpoint. How much are you actually eating? How much are you actually putting into your body? And this is something we didn't talk about too yet.
Well, this is what the scales are useful, right? Actually,
Well,
that's the appropriate use of scales to weigh the food that you eat, right?
Yeah. Well, to weigh the food you eat, but to really give yourself a reality check that often we are eating way more than we think we are. And that's even trusting labels. So that's also something you will not be able to, someone will not be able to set the right macronutrients or meet the right macronutrient targets if those aren't really true. So that's also where it comes into play. So
that
Phil,
was one of the harder things that I had to kind of grapple with at the very beginning. My team had me keep a food journal for, a number of months, and I remember being completely I'm like, there's no way that I ate 7,000 calories today, and I did, and that's why I weighed 600 pounds. And I think that a lot of people, you're super not honest with ourselves for, purposefully or not, because I think food labels can be really tough to read, and being able to weigh everything out and actually track how much you're eating is for most of us going to be a very rude and loud reality check, I think, at the onset.
Yeah, it's difficult, but that's where if you have that moment where you're like, oh, okay, this is what I'm really doing, talk to your support network and talk to your mentor, talk to your coach about it. And then devise a strategy for addressing it. That's it. But it's hard. We have to know where you start to know where you want to go and how to get there.
Yeah. I think there's two pieces around food that somebody, and I can't remember who it was, and I'm sorry to whoever this is if you're listening. I promise I'm not purposely forgetting you, but they said two things. They told me the longer a food's ingredients label is, or the longer the shelf life or expiration date is, the shorter your shelf life is going to be, right? So that's just saying, the more processed things that are in food, the longer it's shelf stable, the higher likelihood that there's preservatives and other things in it that probably shouldn't be in there. And so that's the kind of general goal that I use when I'm looking at different labels. I'm like, label should be short. It should have a relatively short expiration date. It should be fresh. It shouldn't stay quote unquote fresh for 3 weeks unrefrigerated. And so that's just a quick, easy way for me to kind of think about.
That's amazing. And in Europe, a lot of our listeners would notice that there are some foods that do not have labels. Like you will not find a food label on fruit or vegetables, or sometimes even certain types of meat or eggs. There will simply be label free. The single ingredient, but no nutrition label is required for those real things to eat. I love what you said about this. The longer the nutrition label, the shorter your lifespan. It's a brilliant shortcut for people to initially understand. We typically recommend, if you have to buy processed foods or multi-ingredients foods, to keep the number of ingredients on the label. If it's less than 4, you're likely to be in a good place. And if it contains anything that you cannot pronounce or do not have at home, don't buy it.
Yeah.
And it's also, I think it's interesting because a lot of people who I give that recommendation to, they go shopping consciously next time and they say, well, 95% of my supermarket contains things I shouldn't be putting in my mouth. Like pretty much everything in there. There's only a tiny section of things that are food, and everything else is just factory produced.
It's a sad reality of the world that we live in.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's why so many people are in a situation where I was, because we're being forced, like kind of forced directional into these these products in conscious or subconscious ways. And I think that's just continuing to keep us kind of in the cycle of unhealthy living. But I'll get off my soapbox for a minute.
No, agreed. Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, when we speak about the macros, Sarah, you've mentioned the fiber, the fats, the right type of fats, the carbs, the protein, the fiber. We do have an entire manual, an entire guide, a complete framework on how to do this, how to calculate everything that we talk about today, how to set your macros, how much we have detailed tables, everything you need to be successful. And this is exactly what we use with our clients. So if you want one, just drop us an email to info@solutionsmakers.com and we will email it to you for free. There's no obligation, nothing. You just drop us an email. We're going to share this with you so you can start on learning on how to approach your own nutrition. And it works whether you want to lose weight or gain muscle mass, whatever your goals are. The principles stay the same. And if you apply the rules in the right way, you will get the goals that you want. So yeah, feel free to reach out to us at any time if you're still listening at this point.
Hopefully I didn't scare anybody away.
So Phil, what's your real reason? What's your real why? What is underneath and behind all of this for you? What is Phil 25 years from now thanking you for?
For being here. Honestly, I remember I was at an appointment with my primary care doctor. I was 30 at the time, and I was, I think, closing in on about 550 pounds at that point. So not quite at my worst, but still pretty up there. And he just sort of told me, like, if you don't get this under control, like it's really unlikely you're not going to make it to 35. It's really, really, really unlikely you're not going to make it to 40. And I had a little bit of a like a mental break at that point, because I was just like that made it super real. I mean, that's 5-10 years from now. We're not talking 30, 40, 50 years away. We're talking five. You're not going to be here for 5 more years. Like that was crazy to me. And I think that was certainly a big piece of it. And the other piece, and I just sort of had this realization the other day, and I'm trying to hold it in here a little bit, but I think that I feel like a little bit of like wasted time. I think of, the things that I can do now that I wish I could have spent my 20s and early 30s doing, that I didn't get to do because I couldn't move. I couldn't fit on an airplane without having to buy 2 seats. I couldn't walk for more than, 30 steps without being winded. And I think if I would have made this a priority earlier, like I'm like, oh my God, I just think of all the stuff I could have done when I was in college or grad school, when I was younger and wasn't necessarily tied down to a job or any of those other things. And it's a little bit of a reality check and a little bit of a reminder of, I've still got time. Thankfully, I've made these changes. Because of that, I still have time to be able to do these things. And I think that was really kind of what hit me the most, was being here for more than 5 years, and thinking of all the things that I didn't get a chance to do, that I luckily can now successfully do.
This is very interesting, Phil. And we typically work with people with the concept of longevity. And we kind of do it backwards. So most people are not aware of this. Oh, I still have time. Like I can be, I don't need to work out today. I don't need to, care about my diet, my protein, my nutrients right now, because I'm still feel good today. But what many of us fail to understand, that roughly from the age of 25, 27, when we reach our peak athletic performance, the truth is that from that point on until the time we expire, our metrics in terms of our strength, our speed, our cognitive power will be declining constantly. And there are things that we can do to slow this process down, reverse it, or improve our metrics. But the truth is, most of us will never be as strong as they are today. They'll never be thinking as fast as they're thinking today, never have more energy than they have today. But what you have experienced the opposite, right? You've experienced being unable to do things relatively early in life. And when we work with people, we try to get them to understand on what are the things that they would like to do in life when they are 60, 70, 80 years old, right? Whether they want to be able to lift their grandchildren, go on holidays by themselves, right? Put a luggage in the overhead compartments, whether they will be able to carry their own groceries, right? Or remain some sort of an independence. And if they do, maybe, if you take into account the constant decline from when they are today, they might not be able to do that unless they start putting a lot of effort now. to account, to build some reserves and capacity that when that inevitable decline will continue, they will still be able to do the things that matter to them later in life. So you are lucky in a way, I would say, to experience and give you that motivation early on. Quite impressive.
I remember seeing I saw a graphic, maybe it was on Instagram a couple weeks ago, that said, heart disease at 50 starts because of habits that you formed in your 20s, and being able to carry your groceries at 70 depends on strength training in your 30s. And I'm like,
It does.
that's exactly
Absolutely.
right. If you're not setting yourself up now, it's going to compound over time as you get older, and it's certainly not going to get any easier. I always
Yes,
figure,
absolutely.
after 35 or 40, it's 5 or 7 times harder for men to maintain or build muscle mass or new muscle, and I'm
It
like, well,
is.
I
It's not
can't do
it's not impossible, but it's much, much harder than it was in the 20s or in the 30s, right? So the sooner you start thinking about the future, the
it.
easier it is to get to where you want to be. It's like with saving. You start saving late for your retirement, well, it's going to cost you dearly, right?
Yeah.
If you
Right.
start if you start late, and if you start early, you might not even notice, and you're still going to end up in a better place. So it's never too late to start. But this,
Mhm.
if you start today, it will be much easier than if you start tomorrow.
Mhm. Phil, what kind of advice would you give to people? And you probably do this in the groups, and I'm sure you've talked to many people, but people haven't had that time perspective in the same way that you have, or are struggling with just putting themselves in a different place, even hypothetically. What, regardless of whether weight loss is their goal, what do you tell people? What is your advice so that they're more likely to sustain something for longer?
So I think a couple things. I think setting expectations and managing expectations is really, really helpful. It's if you go through a surgical intervention for weight loss in particular, you'll see things happen really, really quickly. You'll see it slow down over time. That doesn't mean you're unsuccessful. That's just you need to expect that and anticipate that.
Mhm.
If you're regardless of what you're if you're uh, training to be an endurance athlete, or you're training for a bodybuilding show, I think we just have to remember that incremental small gains are gains. Whether you're moving forward in a leap or a tiny step forward, it's a step in the right direction. Regardless, it sounds super cliche and annoying in my head, but I think that I just have to remind myself of that all the time.
Mhm.
um, and the biggest thing, and this one probably took a lot of kind of self-reflection for me, was this idea of the people around you, right? If the people in your circle don't support you or inspire you or challenge you to be better, then you don't really have a circle, you have a cage. And I think that if you are surrounding yourself with people who aren't pushing you, who are maybe placating you or telling you what you want to hear because they don't want to hurt you, or they want you to still be around or not be mad at them, or whatever the case might be. I think that
Mhm.
that's a very kind of enabling culture, and I think that I've certainly found myself stuck in that before. I try not to do that to other people, because I know kind of the harm that can do to somebody. But I think that making sure that you're surrounded with the right mindset, people who have similar mindsets, similar goals,
Mhm.
who aren't gonna kind of consciously or subconsciously pull you back to where you were, I think is really, really important. And so I've found my circle around me shifting quite a bit in the last 5 years. A lot of people who I was super close to in 2020 have kind of faded out into the background. Other people have kind of come to the forefront, and I think that took a lot of
Mhm.
thought and kind of cognitive dissonance for a little while, to think, I don't want this person to leave, but are they the best in my in this moment right now for me? And I think that it's being honest and thoughtful about that part of it. It's tough, and it can be super emotional. I know at least it was for me, but um, I think that really kind of has given me the best chance of long term success, is just being surrounded by the right kinds of people who really do have my best interests at heart and want me to continue to grow and be better.
It's actually something that we teach people as well, that it is okay to move on from where you were in life, and that may include the people that were around you in life. There is this old Chinese saying, I think it's Chinese because everything that's clever We think it's Chinese. Something like this. It's when a blind man starts to see, the first thing he lets go of is his cane that supported him for his entire life. And a lot of people, when they hear this, they think it's a story about not, abandoning things that are important or were important. But they rarely the first thought is that actually a story about moving on. It's a story about letting go and the importance of it. I really like that because it applies to many different things. It also applies to the people you're surrounded with, right? We say that you're an average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And sometimes, especially in treatments of addictions, the change in your environment or the people you're interacting with the most is sometimes the only thing that's necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And we teach people that it's something you should be proud of if you're able to outgrow certain groups of people and maybe motivate them as well, or so they can follow in your footsteps at their own pace, right? There's nothing wrong with this, and there is no shame in growing, right? Or changing or becoming better version of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's quite a powerful story, and I'm really happy that you touched upon this. We know that the social relationships are a big part of, in general, of cognitive performance in a way, or cognitive strength. And it looks like you've made a very broad range of adaptations and changes and modifications in your life, right? Both in not just in the way that you physically, the physical things, but also in in your social circles and how you think about yourself. What struck me quite profoundly earlier was that you started going to the gym, you went on a treadmill, and you walked for 10 minutes and say, well, I'm like, I cannot walk anymore, I'm useless, kind of a thing. Like, you said something like this, that it made you extremely feel bad about yourself, which was very interesting because to me it looked like, well, you were probably sedentary before and never had a gym membership before. Now you suddenly went and walked on a treadmill for 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in my world, or in our world, that's a success, because 10 minutes is better than 0 minutes or 7 minutes, right? Or one
You're exactly right. You're exactly
1
right.
minute
I
is
feel
better
like
than 0 minutes, right?
this version of myself can recognize that. The version of myself 5 years ago didn't recognize that, and I was
Yes,
frustrated that it wasn't sort of an all or nothing. Like I couldn't do what he told me to do, so it was a failure. And
Mm-hmm.
that's it. Yeah, that's interesting. It's very interesting to see this, that you are making progress, yet you're doing the right things. Yet you still have a tendency to think that you're a failure,
Mhm.
despite being in much better place than before. Right, 10 minutes comparing to 0 minutes, it's a massive progress.
Yeah. And it's I think it's sessions like this, honestly, that kind of ground me back in that, because I know even the last couple of weeks I was frustrated with myself because I'm going in for another round of plastic surgery in a little over a week, and I had sort of a goal that I had set for myself a few months ago where I wanted to be at a certain body composition by that point, and I'm not going to make it. It's going to be close, but I'm not going to be quite there, and I just found myself being really frustrated over the last couple of weeks. I was like, oh my God, it's so close. Like, why couldn't I should have just done this or done that or pushed harder or did this differently. And I just had to stop myself every now and then and be like, remember where you came from. Like, you couldn't take out the garbage without having
Right.
like an asthma attack. And you just did a 20-mile walk last week
Mm.
and then continued to do the rest of your day. Like, you weren't sitting on the couch after that all day. And I feel like there just has to be some like level of self-reflection and some grounding in this process to keep you, to remind you of where you came from, and that just because you didn't, maybe hit this exact goal in the way that you thought it would, or in the timeline that you had planned, that doesn't mean that you're not, still moving forward or still being
On
successful.
track.
That's
Yeah.
it. You're still on track. Yeah, it just might take a little bit longer. That's it. That's all there is, right? You just need to keep and persevere.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You answered my question. I was gonna kind of wrap up with was, when you have these harder days or these harder weeks, is that your strategy? Just bring it back to what is the goal and why, and remind yourself where you came from. That can be helpful, but this time perspective I'm hearing is really what helps you re pull yourself, kind of step out of maybe the bigger emotions that would have impeded you previously or would impede you otherwise. Are there any other strategies that you find are helpful when you run into something like this, and what are
I
they?
I always find that the universe sends me things when I need them most, right? Whether that's a reminder on my Facebook feed of a picture I posted in 2016 playing with seals in St. Lucia when I was close to 500 pounds at that point. I was like, oh my God, like look at that guy. He was huffing and puffing all over the place, and you're not that person anymore. So, that's one. The other thing that I find that's been really helpful is just continuing to do what I'm doing as much as it sucks, as much as I don't want to do it, as much as I don't want to get out of bed at 4:15 to go to the gym and just, slug myself through it. 9 times out of 10, once I'm there, well, honestly, 10 times out of 10, once I'm there, I feel much better. I never regret going to the gym and getting a workout in or moving or doing something after I've done it. It always makes me feel better. There's always people there. I'm at a pretty small gym where those of us who are there in the morning, we're always there together. We all know each other. We all kind of can motivate and uplift and inspire each other. I have a couple people there that I lean on pretty heavily when I'm having those tough days, and in their own ways, with their own versions of tough love, have kind of helped pull me through some of those times where I'm just like, oh, like I hate this, like this isn't worth it, and why am I doing this to myself? And um, again, I think it goes back to that idea of surrounding yourself with the right people, right? I don't think I would have ever found myself, hanging out with and socializing with some of the people that I do now, and I'm very grateful and lucky that they're around and that they continue to stick around despite my craziness and all the fun stuff. But I think that just keeping that routine and keeping moving forward, and like I said, the universe for some reason will find ways to insert itself when it needs to, and those nice little surprises always pop up and always kind of help keep me on track.
Could you have
Amazing.
done it? Could you have done it yourself?
No.
And what would you do? What would you wish you had or known at the beginning that you've only learned later during your journey?
I think there's maybe two things. I think again, I feel like I keep going back to this, but it's become more and more important to me as I continue in this process. But just making sure that you're surrounded with the right people. I think that I kind of went into this thinking it was a very solo process. I'm just gonna do this. I'm gonna buckle down and just do what I need to do. I'm not going to talk to a whole lot of people about it. I'm just going to do what I need to do. And I'm not super sociable. I don't want to talk about it. It's not something that I want other people to know. So I'm just going to
Mhm.
slug it
Mm.
out and deal with it. And I mean, it worked for a little while, but it got to a point where I was just like, I don't have anybody to talk to about this. If I'm at a low point, like I don't have anybody that I can relate to or that can kind of help me pull this. And so building a support network and building a group of people around me that understand and help and want me to be better, I think was super helpful. Um, the other piece that I kind of wish I would have thought about more at the beginning was again just kind of this idea of incremental progress and keeping the long-term goal in mind. And there might not be like a number or an end to it. Like what happens after you meet your goal weight? Like then what?
Mm.
You just
Well, we know
done?
we know what happens, Phil, right? People stop, they've done it, and then they end up in a worse place than they started.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I don't want that to happen to myself. So I think that, I've had to adapt a couple different times because I'm like, well, what's next? What's the new goal? What's coming next? What can I do now? Like now that I met this goal, what's gonna happen after that? And it kind of keeps me thinking about what's important to me and what I'm prioritizing, which is it's nice. I hate thinking about myself and I hate talking about myself, and so it's always really strange to kind of have those conversations with myself or with anybody else. But I think that I went into this process thinking like 250 is the magic number, and once I'm there, I'm a success, and that's it. And then I hit that number, and I was like, well, I
What's
did it.
next?
So yeah, so now what do I do? And so I think that again, I've had a very unhealthy relationship with the scale my entire life, and I think that so many people in this world of uh, weight
Yes.
loss or performance or fitness or any of those things kind of keep that number as the be all end all metric of success. And I wish that my team and other people around me have had kind of instilled in me from the beginning that that's not always the case. And there are other metrics of success that you should be mindful of. I think that would have saved me a lot of frustration and stress, unnecessary stress throughout this process that I've, luckily been able to gain as I've kind of come down the road further along. But I wish I had that a little bit earlier in the process.
Phil, you have an amazing Instagram profile. You share with people what you do, and it's honest. It's real. I really like this. Would you mind telling everyone who will be listening to us where they can find you and how they can learn from you and how they can reach out to you?
Sure, yeah, I am on Instagram. So my handle is they're my initials. P is in Phil, T is in Travis, R is in Rathosky, and the number is 5006. So if you it's a public Instagram, so feel free to peep around and check it out. If feel free to reach out if you're in a similar situation or have had or know people that are in a similar situation. I'm happy to send me a message and let me know. I'm happy to kind of help talk through. I think one of the things that I always tell people is that I can't, I've had a lot of people that have come to me that are like, oh, my brother or sister, whoever is really overweight, like, can you talk to them and get them to do this? And I always tell them, like, I'm happy to talk to them if they want to talk to me, but they need to hit a point like I hit. I mentioned at the very beginning, my low point was that chair breaking in the auditorium. If that hadn't happened to me, I would likely still be on that, kind of self-destructive path where I didn't have that kind of mechanism to push me in another direction to kind of stop me and make me think about something. And I think everybody has to hit that point for themselves. I can't coach somebody out of it. I can't, people tried to do that to me. They were like, you need to do this, you need to change, you need to do that. I'm like, no, I'm fine. Like, I'm healthy, everything's fine. And I think that, again, I'm happy to talk to people who have gone through this, who are considering going through it, who have loved ones that go through it. But I wish it was easy enough that I could just kind of talk to somebody and make them want to do it, but it's not that easy.
Mm-hmm. Phil, thank you so much for sharing your journey and some hard parts and some successes. And a year from now, we'd love to hear from you. We'll see where you are, what your
Yeah.
goals
Yeah,
and how you're celebrating 5 years into your journey.
Yeah, well, when you say it like that, it seems oh,
We would love to hear from you in another 5 years and see what else you have learned.
Yeah.
And because I do believe that there's still a lot to discover
Mm-hmm.
and learn both about yourself. And I hope that the conversation today will help a lot of people to put their life back on track. I mean, that's what we do, that this is what we're passionate about, but you're an example of an amazing success.
no.
But you're also an example that this success comes at the price, right? There are no shortcuts to success.
Mhm.
If people believe that they will be very disappointed, right? And it is a lifelong journey, and it takes time, right? And effort and commitment.
I always say
Forever,
that
right?
the
Yeah.
outward manifestation of your body is sort of the ultimate symbol of commitment, right? You can't buy your way, you can't shortcut your way to a healthy looking body, a healthy fit person. And so you've got to be in it for the long term, one way or the other.
Yes, absolutely. And it's especially now there's this growing popularity of pharmaceutical interventions that reduce people's appetite. Maybe they're preferable to surgery. It's difficult for me to answer. They have their own share of challenges and side effects.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially what they do is you put yourself in a state where you're less hungry, therefore you create a calorie deficit, and which can sometimes be quite traumatic. So a lot of people who are using those medicines, they don't realize the trap that they're setting for themselves if they do not immediately start on a regimen of mental work, right? On changing their relationship with food, on learning new habits, working out, preventing muscle mass loss, right? Because those things will just backfire the moment they stop using the drug. So, and we hear stories about this from left and right at the moment, because those drugs been long enough now to create a large group of people who unfortunately ended up in a worse place when they started, right? At a significant expense and a cost to their health. It's a very interesting place. But in truth, it doesn't matter how you achieve your deficit, right? It's not enough. It's easy to lose weight, we sometimes say, right? It's difficult to keep it. And you are, I think, an inspiration to pretty much everyone who tries to change their life and put it back on track. So well done. Again, it's the 5% of people who are absolutely doing something right, and that's quite impressive.
No, you're making me feel completely inadequate, but I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the Solutions Manual. And Phil, thank you. We'll share your handle and talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you both so much.